Hello, everyone. Welcome to Interphase, a series presented by the curatorial team behind Combahee's Radical Call. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Cierra Peters. I like to say that I support the revolution at the Boston Dreamer Project, a Black-led cooperative business, arts, and investment ecosystem built by and for Boston's working class communities of color, and the Create Well Fund, an artist-run award program that funds artists of color in their artistic practice and holistic well-being. I'm also a co-curator on this project, and I'll be the moderator for today's conversation. Combahee's Radical Call, Black Feminisms Awaken Boston, is a year-long multi-platform curatorial project co-curated by Arielle Gray, Jen Mergel, and myself, stewarded by the wisdom of the original Combahee River Collective member, Demita Frazier. The project takes the form of a series of public installations and programs that recenter the vital legacy of Black feminisms, archives, and the written word in Boston. Through June 2021, Combahee's Radical Call invites audiences to re-engage with our histories, present, and future visions. I just want to say again that we are extremely grateful to Demita Frazier as a guiding voice, interlocutor, advisor, and an inspiration, as well as the Boston Center for the Arts and Boston Art Review for co-hosting this conversation. Interphase is our inaugural talk, and we are excited to welcome Zoe Pulley, Mithsuca Barry, and Nakia Hill. This conversation will unfold in two parts. First, we'll hear from the artists themselves about their practices, and then we'll join in dialogue and luxuriate in your conversation, in your questions. Please note that all audience questions should be submitted through the Q&A function, and the Q&A will begin after the presentations. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the artists, and then we're just going to jump in. For Mithsuca Barry, creativity goes beyond technicality and into a way of living. At a young age, art was an extremely important tool for healing. And now, across mediums like illustration, mixed media, and radical art education, those histories can be told. They say, my goal as an artist is to take up as much space with Black imagery as I can, fill it with images that couldn't exist in the constraints of our reality. I don't mind making a world or a time frame in which Black bodies can exist. They should exist anywhere our minds take us. Zoe Pulley is currently a presidential fellow pursuing an MFA in graphic design at RISD in Providence, Rhode Island, motivated to preserve generational narratives of Black experiences through print, textiles, and other media, and to foster more design spaces to elevate Black and Brown people. Pulley pursues ongoing projects, including the jewelry line Grandstands, inspired by her grandmother, Sandra, and a collaborative open call project, the Black Joy Archive, whose print publications have funded Black liberation organizations. And lastly, we have Nakia Hill, who is a writer, journalist, and educator who focuses on empowering Black women and girls to use writing as a tool for healing and resistance. Nakia is a native of Roxbury and named as a Boston Artist in Residence in 2018. Nakia is the author of two books, Water Carrier, and a collection of poetry dedicated to my healing journey, and I Still Did It, Stories of Resilience. She currently directs 826 Boston's Writers' Room program and is the first Black woman to become an editor at the Boston Art Review magazine with her latest her latest work in issue 6, timestamp now available. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guests. So thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited to, luxuriate again in your work and, everything that y'all have been producing and thinking about. But I just wanted to ask, how are you and who are you today? And Nakia, if you want to start, we can start with you.
Thank you for that question. Good afternoon, everyone. I am doing well. I'm feeling empowered and standing in my power today. And also it's raining, so that just really sparks like a real chill vibe, so.
I'll jump in next. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm feeling good. I mean, I'm also riding the rain wave right now, just trying to relax and stay centered and comfortable. So, yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mithsuca. As for me, I'm feeling like the color orange and the color yellow. I'm trying to channel that energy. I'm trying to channel like the sun right now, because I do feel like this is going to be a very healing conversation and experience, and so I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Also, where are y'all at? Like, where are you calling in from? I know that we're all in different parts of the world right now.
I'm calling from Boston. I'm in the South End right now.
I'm in Providence.
Cute.
I'm currently calling in from California, but I was in Boston's rainy energy a few days ago, so I very much feel connected with that still. It's lingering.
Oh my God, so cute. Yeah, no, I'm in Brooklyn and it seems like it's raining everywhere, though the sun is like starting to come out now. So super, super excited for that. So I just wanted to ask one question to ground us, and then we're going to jump into the presentations. But I was really interested in how you all maybe began engaging with Black feminisms. And I'm using the term Black feminisms really expansively. I want us to sit in like the nuance and plurality of experiences that exist. And I mean to say that Black feminism is interrupting like hierarchy, meaning, value, rewriting and revising what we understand to be true. So like, how did y'all start engaging with Black feminisms, and more specifically, the legacy of the Combahee River Collective? And like, what has it made possible or impossible for you?
Personally, I'm still coming to terms with Black feminism and what that actually means in my life as I show up in the world. But I mean, those that do identify as feminists in the Black community, I definitely admire their work. I think about Bell Hooks, and as Bell Hooks, as a scholar, a writer, who often writes about feminism, that's actually how I really started to educate myself on what that meant for me and really start to process and break that down. So to be honest, I think Black feminism is truly, whether you agree with the nuances of feminism and does that actually belong to us as Black people, as, you know, I think that I would say that that is Black women that stand in their truth. They're unapologetic. They're not waiting for a seat at the table. They're building their own. They're out on the streets. They're raising their voice. So yeah, that's how I've become familiar with Black feminism and what that means. But honestly, I'm still trying. I don't know if I'm really trying to find my place in that space. But those are my thoughts about Black feminism.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, my personal experiences with Black feminisms, I feel like I really first began falling into this, line of reading histories and just learning. My freshman year of college, I attended an HBCU, Spelman College, in which a lot of our required reading was, of course, to learn about a lot of these Black feminists and writers at an early point in the semester. And prior to that, I felt like I knew some of these names, of course, through family members recommending things, but that was really the point that freshman year that sparked my interest in digging deeper, really making sure that I knew the histories of these people, not just their writings alone, and knowing all of the references and connotations that came with that. my personal relation with Black feminisms, much like Nakia, I'm not sure where I exactly sit in all of this. I know that I'm interested in the historical piece and making sure that Black feminist histories live on, whatever means that may be. But me, myself, I'm just here, going with the flow for now.
I'll say that I feel very similarly to the two of you. I think, I don't know, in the concept of feminism in general, I feel like there's always like a specific connotation that people associate with Black feminism. And a lot of the times in those conversations, I feel a bit of like a weird discomfort, just because of the ways that like I feel Black womanhood has been like projected onto my body from like a queer, like non-binary perspective, and knowing just how vast the conversation around Blackness, especially in like a way where you can be perceived as femme or like femme presenting, or have those like specific conversations around like Black womanhood, like conversed about around you. But I feel like that personal experience is very intense, and your Blackness really intersects with so many deep layers of every fiber of your being, along with these other ways that your environment kind of reacts to your existence. And so like for the archival work, for like the reference, I feel like Black feminist works have really nurtured me and kind of carried me to a point where I can now discover these conversations within my own body and within the way my community functions now. And so it's always great to have like people recording their existence for you, because I feel like if it weren't for a lot of those works, like a lot of this wouldn't have a reference point to where we even want to begin those conversations in relation to our bodies and our minds and like how we exist in the society around us, and in the way that they treat Black womanhood. And so it's a conversation of violence, of beauty, of like passion, of like creativity. And so I don't even know what words can really bottle that up, which is why language can be really frustrating for me. But I see that at like the center of like the seed that was kind of planted, for all of these conversations to come about and for even our works to be created. And so I'm deeply grateful for that. But like, to go back, it's kind of hard to like see where my body kind of fits in all of that. But just because like my practice is still expanding and changing, and I feel like it's going to exceed language that we've used at some point. It's going to get way more complex and like going to be harder to like summarize the different experiences that people are bringing to the conversation. So we'll see. But yeah, I hope that answers it.
I love that. I'm excited to like sit in like the nuance and the nuance, of each of your practices. So thank you all for answering that question. So we're going to get into the presentations, and I'm going to invite Nakia to tell us a little bit more about her work.
Thank you, Cierra. Wonderful. And we can move on to the next slide. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our conversation today. My name is Nakia Hill, but before I was the Nakia that you'll learn a little bit about today, I was just Kia, a Black girl from Roxbury, raised by 3 resilient Black women and by my godfather, an honorable Black Caribbean man. On the left-hand side, you'll see a photo of myself at 4 years old in my grandmother's home in Jamaica Plain, where she still resides today. I was 4 years old, and at this time, I was experiencing a lot of trauma. And I won't get into all of that today, but I wanted to start off in memory of this little girl, because she had no idea how her life would unfold, bringing her here in front of all of you virtually. during a global pandemic, still during a time where Black people are still seeking justice. Asian Americans are raising their voices to demand the end of violence against their community, and Indigenous people are, again, still fighting, as the BIPOC community still fighting for their rightful land, that we're all, wherever you are, whether you're tuning in from Boston, Massachusetts, the East Coast, West Coast, we're all standing on Indigenous people's rightful land that belongs to them. Next slide. And when I think about my practice and where my practice has sparked from, but my practice was built out of frustration. I am a product of the Boston public school system. In 2003, I left Boston to attend Howard University. And during my first semester, I registered for an Africana Studies class and read the textbook that you see in front of you, Africana Studies by Mario Acevedo. And within this class, having discussions, reading the text, taking exams, and just all of the conversations, I learned so much more about Black history. And I realized that my history, our history, American history, African history throughout the diaspora was intentionally left out of our schools' history books. And this just sparked my life's work and my commitment to retelling and amplifying and preserving Black people's stories, especially Black women. Next slide, please. And once I graduated, I always remember my roots. I remembered my roots, and I knew that my roots needed to be tended. So I came back home to Boston, and I've been working in the nonprofit sector since I was 13 years old. And even when I was working at my first job out of college was at the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And there, of course, I graduated with a degree in journalism. So I was freelance writing. I got a wonderful opportunity. One of my favorite supervisors, who was Afro Latinx woman, I got an opportunity to intern in New York City because I thought I was going to be working at Essence or Vibe magazine. And I worked a part-time job. And this Black woman, once I got an editorial internship, she gave me permission to take 2 days out of the week to commute to and from Boston to New York City so that I can intern and gain more experience at Giant magazine. And I did that for 3 months. I thugged it out. Then I came back. So each time I would come back, I was traveling back and forth from Boston to New York. And when I would come back, the students that I would work with, they're like, where were you? Why are you doing this? And again, like planting the seeds, I started like a blog, and I would share the articles that was published online. And those are just ways for me to continue to plant seeds in the community. I started to talk to young Black girls in the community about writing, leading writing workshops. And these are all examples of just my life work as an artist, as an educator, and a journalist to plant seeds within my own hometown in Boston. You can go to the next slide. Then I started to think about, once I graduated from, I went back to school to get my master's in multimedia journalism. And I only did that because it was during the recession and I couldn't find a job. I was unemployed for a year. I attended graduate school. And after I graduated graduate school, I started to ask myself a question. Do you want to get on this hamster wheel and work a 9 to 5 and get a salary job? Or do you want to continue to plant those seeds that would bloom into gifts? So I started to ask myself, what are your gifts? The one thing, despite me working in the nonprofit sector, despite me working in the field of education and also as a journalist, I realized that there was a common thread, and that common thread was my love and my passion for writing. And I feel like it was God who's like, okay, you have this gift for writing, so use them. Next slide. So I continue to keep sowing, to keep planting, and to keep watering the seeds. I was fortunate enough in 2018 to be named a Boston Artist in Resident, and that truly was a transformative period in my life. Because I was connected as a writer. For any of my writers out there, you know that being a writer, you feel like you're in silos. And even as a writer, I never even identified writing as an art form until the Boston Air program. And I'm like, yeah, like writers, we are artists as well. Like it's not only visual, and we're dancers. And I was connected to a community of artists. And I feel like that really helped me locally get plugged into the artist community. So from there, as an artist in residence, you get resource connections, and the resources were monetary. So I used that funding to publish my first book, Water Carrier, because contributing to my work as a writer, and again, planting those seeds and sharing my gifts for writing, and how writing has been a transformative tool for healing for me. My plan was to publish a book telling the resilient stories of girls and women of color in Boston, which I eventually did in 2019 in January. But I was just like, how dare I come into the Grove Hall Community Center, where I led writing workshops for seasoned women, senior women. I don't like to call them seniors because they're seasoned. They have so much wisdom. But I was welcome into the space, and I needed to build their trust. As an artist, if we want to collaborate with the community, you really have to pull off your own scabs, pull all the layers, and be vulnerable and gain community members' trust to tell them who you are and why you're there. That, you have to ask permission to be in those space, and then give those people stake and saying, okay, well, this is the stories we want to tell. This is what we need your support for. These are the bridges that we need you to gap. We need those bridges to be gapped. So I led writing workshops with these seasoned women, and also young girls ages 10 to 21 years old at the New Academy Estates in Roxbury. And we published a book together, and that's how I Still Did It was birthed. And we had a beautiful book release party, and a local photographer, Lauren Miller, took the headshots of the photographers. And I really make sure in all of the work that I do that it's not only for me, but it's for us. So any projects that I work on, you'll see me with a team of Black or women and girls of color, from the copy editors to the photographers to the designers. Like, I really want to bring my community with me. Next slide. So I published both of my books, and went on, lived my life. And we were in 2020, and February came, March, then we were hit with the pandemic. And even before, it was official that it was a pandemic and we were going to shut down the entire world, things were happening around the globe and in our country, in America. And the names that you see in front of you, starting up to, again, the reason why I do what I do as far as telling stories about my people's stories is because of the Emmett Tills, the Trayvon Martins, the Tony McDades, the 4 little girls that were, in the church and lit on, like, it would, all of this in March really left me with grappling with, I was fed up, number one. I was pissed off. I was angry. All of these emotions, I really just allowed myself to embrace, especially as a Black woman, because, the the feeling of anger, we don't want to tap into that sometimes. So I let myself be pissed and angry. I allowed myself to process that generational trauma from these names that you see in front of you and the names that we do not see and the names that are also unspoken. And I was just grappling with my role in the Black Lives Matter movement. I felt like, although it was my life work to continue planting the seeds, using my gifts to give back to my community and people, I still felt like I needed to do more. Then one day I received an email, it was over the summer, last summer, I received an email introducing me to Jamison, who was the editor-in-chief and founder of the Boston Art Review magazine. We talked. I read issues of Barr. I prayed on it. And she invited me to join their editorial board. And from that conversation, Revel and Black Excellence was birthed because I really was just trying to find my place in the Black Lives Matter movement. I committed to being the first Black editor at Barr under a few conditions, that I was able to publish stories that celebrated Black artists and Black artists only in my section. Any of the photographers, designers that would touch the section at all had to be from Black, Indigenous, and Latinx and Asian communities. And if they were LGBTQ+, they had to be a person of color if they were going to be a photographer or a designer in this section. And now today, and that did happen, and I definitely thank Jamison for just kind of moving aside and being open. And, when white people ask, how can we, when we say do the work to show up and the questions, what should we do? That is a prime example of you having privilege, you having resources, and, providing space and doing the work. So I definitely appreciate Barr for that. And now today, Barr is seeking a new managing editor to join their team. And I'm encouraging anyone who's listening that is a Black or POC person to join and take up some space in future issues, because honestly, that was my purpose there, was to build our own table so someone else can come behind me and build their own table, and to continue to tell our stories in our rawest, our most authentic voices. Next slide. And today I'll leave you guys with a piece. And honestly, I was editing this piece 2 hours before today's event started, because my work is just always in process. It's a piece that will be published in an anthology that I was hired to produce for the International Women's Writing Guild's mentorship program. That book is releasing next month during Women's History Month. You can definitely stay updated. I'll be posting and sharing on my Instagram feed. That's where I am on social media. And the title of this piece is Protect Us. Protect us. Words we've never had in our vocabulary until today. We shield you. You shoot us in our foot because you are afraid that we will walk away. You fail to stand in your rightful place. Was it too much to protect us before we were stolen from our mothers and our land? Our innocence lay dormant. Black girls are raised to carry the world on our backs without complaining about the heaviness. It is painful to carry this generational trauma. This pain leaves bruises and lacerations. What happens if we let go? Self-caring for us, stealing back water we poured into nourishing your roots, your holes without lawn to water is useless. We are uprooting generational curses, fertilizing our wounds with holy water and oil, burning our daughters' traumas at the root. We are silent to appease you. We stay silent to avoid disappointment. We stand poised. We pretend to live this life with ease and then get called out for speaking up. When we are fed up, when our kettle becomes hot and starts singing, you fail to lift us up when we are constantly holding you down. Down at the bottom of that ceiling, the glass ceiling that we are working tirelessly to shatter. And you, and you, and you too will benefit from our labor once again. When we are missing, why don't you look for us? Why aren't there petitions? Why aren't there policies? Where are the bills? Where are the alerts inspired by our pain and our names? You see our names, but do you recite them? Do you wrap our lyrics around your tongue like you do misogyny? What happens if reparations are paid in full? Do to us for wombs housed by masters' babies. Do to us for stolen intellectual property. Do to us for breastfeeding white babies. Do to us for cleaning houses that don't belong to us. Do to us for cooking food that we can't even devour. Do to us for planting seeds in our gardens and then walking away. We refuse to die. We chose to bloom. Redemption season is upon you. We are kicking down doors, taking what's rightfully ours. No knock warrant in sight. Thank you.
Wow, Nakia, that was incredible. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and read that beautiful piece. That was really great.
Thank you.
Hi, y'all. My name is Zoe Pulley. Yeah, thank you again for taking the time to join us this afternoon and be able to join us in this conversation. Yeah, just to give some quick backstory on myself, I'm currently a grad student here at Rhode Island School of Design. I'm in the graphic design department in their 3-year track. So just getting started here, just moved to Providence from Brooklyn, New York, where I resided for a little over 3 years. And then previous to that, I attended undergrad at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I graduated in 2015 with a BFA in fashion design and a minor in media studies. As I mentioned earlier, I did attend Spelman College my freshman year of college and ended up transferring to BCU purely because I wanted to get a design degree. Loved my HBCU life, but was hoping to enter the fashion field. So this presentation I've put together, I've labeled practicing. And it's pretty much just a little encapsulation of course, my current process, but I felt weird. You know, there's so much weight with the word practice when it comes to an art practice. It's this ever-evolving process. It's this ever-evolving thing. But something about it feels like it kind of denotes this one stylistic thing that you kind of carry on throughout your work. One aesthetic, one idea, one lane of research. So I wanted to call this practicing just to kind of connotate evolution. I feel like a lot of my work, yes, deals with specific narratives and generally dealing with Black experiences, but I definitely feel like visually and aesthetically, things evolve and change. And I don't think that I'm someone who wants to feel like I'm locked into one idea or one way of telling a story. Yes, so we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so just going back, here we go, this is the right one. Yeah, so just going back to this whole idea of process, the way that I work is very much tactilely. I like to think of myself as more of a form maker before anything. So here, this image is actually just a picture from one of my sketchbooks, but Here we go. Some extra pictures of my sketchbook, but I'm someone who really believes that my process kind of begins with this whole matriculation of actually getting ideas down onto paper, whatever they may be. I have stacks of sketchbooks that I like to just keep with me. And I feel like all of my sketchbooks are essentially different, I guess, visual diaries, if that sounds too cheesy, but visual diaries of kind of where my head is at a certain period in time. This one pictured here is actually from more of my apparel design days. As I mentioned before, I studied fashion design, and a lot of my work, I'm still very much interested in textile and weaving manipulation, anything like that. So this book is the perfect encapsulation of kind of where my process was at one point versus where it kind of stands today. Going to the next slide, please. Yeah, so getting back into this whole idea of just evolution and carrying on storytelling. Back in, I want to say 2017, I began this jewelry line called Grandsands, in which it's named after my grandmother, Sandra, who's pictured here. Sandra herself is a designer, an artist, an incredible woman, one of my best friends. And with this project, Grandsands, I was really interested in carrying on this generational narrative of making. To me, that is a radical act in itself, to be a Black person who has the privilege to be able to not only connect with a family member, but then to learn from them and then retell or carry on a practice or a story that they experienced in their lives in a new way. So carrying on the legacy of your family, essentially. So with that, I started the Grandsands line, paying homage, of course, to my grandmother, but also wanting to just continue this practice of jewelry making that I started with her when I was young. We can go to the next slide. So since starting in 2017, I have created 5 lines, or 4 lines. The 5th is actually being released in a few weeks. So please stay tuned on my Instagram for some posts about that. But pretty much every line has some sort of feature that ties back to materiality that I used to work with my grandmother with. So when I was younger, I remember going to her house and we would go through, my sister and I would go through her like extensive jewelry collection and find pieces that we could repurpose and make new items out of. So this collection in particular is actually featuring some macrame work that is another practice that my grandmother taught me how to do. And going to the next slide. And then again, here we have that macrame. So this line was actually released, I want to say in 2019. And at this point in time, I was very much interested in this like brightly lit aesthetic, neon pop colors. I kind of feel like I'm still living in this place right now. But if we go to the next slide, this was the previous collection that came out in 2018. So here I was playing with the materiality of brass, which I feel like my grandmother owns a lot of like big, beautiful brass pieces. She always has beautiful rings of silver and brass colors on her hands. So it felt really important to kind of like highlight that. But as you can see, this is kind of taking on a different tonality and a different feel. And I feel like at this point in time, this was very much where my practice was. I kind of like this more muted, drawn back, I guess more reserved sort of look. Going on to the next slide. And here's some more images here. And just to speak more about the Grandsands collaborative process here, I feel really blessed to have been able to work with so many amazing people to make all of this Grandsands line possible. Of course, my grandmother, the inspiration, but the actual photos and the models and the previous images, it was my younger sister. And this image here, it's my best friend, Samantha Storch. So I feel super lucky that I have been able to work with amazing creatives who have been so supportive of, you know, my vision and my design process. And please don't let me forget the amazing photographers that I've also worked with. The previous photos were done by Stephen Clatterbuck, and then these current photos were done by Leo Estevez. Going to the next slide. So just going back to this whole idea of generational narrative, a Substack project that I did the end of 2019, which was also very much inspired by this whole idea of continuing this making practice. This was called Grand Plant. And essentially this project was inspired by my grandmother again. And I think I mentioned this before, but my grandmother did a whole lot of macrame. Back in the 70s, she actually did this amazing project in which she taught herself how to macrame, and then created this whole showcase of all of her macrame pieces out of her house in Germantown, Philadelphia. And these are some images here pictured from that said show. So after I saw these images, I was super jazzed. I was like, wow, I want to do this in a new way. So going to the next slide. So from that, Grand Plant was invented, and essentially it was just an updated version of the same practice that my grandmother had. These images here were taken by my, these images here were taken by my friend, Nick Mithsuca, again, going back to the amazing community of creatives that I've been fortunate enough to work with. So going to the next slide. So I kind of want to get more into this whole conversation of what I exactly mean by like generational narratives and the preservation of narratives themselves. So growing up, I feel like, you know, I've always kind of had this spark or this interest within myself where I, one, have been a history nerd, and two, I've always just been very sentimental in certain ways. I've always been that person who would go to the family member's house and want to look through photo albums and want to learn more about my personal histories and where I come from. And I feel like I am a privileged one, you know, being a Black person who's able to have the space to do that is a radical act in itself, because so many times our histories are erased. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who can remember a time being in a class in which somebody that looks like you wasn't even mentioned. So I always felt it was really important, especially now that I'm moving into this higher education space, to make sure that people who look like me and people who have their own personal stories, their own personal histories, have the space to tell said stories. So with that, last summer, I started this project called Black Joy Archive. And this was in response to George Floyd's murder back in the spring, after being constantly inundated with images that just reminded us of Black trauma, Black death, Black bodies just not being viewed as humans whatsoever. I wanted to create this project in which it was an open call for any Black person to submit images of their Black joy. And that Black joy can be whatever it is or whatever that means to them. And then said images were then collected to be digitally archived as well as created into a print book format. We can go to the next slide. So here pictured is the print book. 35 copies were compiled. Again, shouting out the creative community. Shout out to Secret Rizzo Club in Brooklyn, who helped me actually print all of this on a Rizzograph. And then everything was hand bound and shipped out. The amazing thing with this project is that within 2 months, I collected over 65 submissions, and then all submissions, which totaled out to over 200, or actually, I'm sorry, I'm totally underestimating here. I want to say it was over 500 images actually are currently archived online. So this was an amazing collective effort that I was hoping could be this therapeutic practice solely for Black people to be given the time and the space to reflect on not only their personal histories, but the moments that bring them highlight, bring them joy, remind them that they're human, that they matter, versus this constant story that I feel like as a Black person in America, we're constantly told, which is struggle and pain and trauma. So the amazing thing also with this project, so we ended up making 35 copies, which we sold online, and 100% of the proceeds were donated to 3 Black organizations that are helping fight Black liberation efforts. The book sold out in 24 hours, so amazing turnout. And with that, I'm hoping that we can keep this an annual ongoing project that allows more people to submit, tell their stories, and have the space to do so. Going to the next slide, please. Well, that previous slide, sorry, we're a little jumpy. Thank you. And just adding to the Black Joy Archive project. I also created this risograph poster that, was just a lovely little addition and more accessible piece to the limited book run for people to be a part of the project and help fund its efforts. To the next slide, please. And lastly, I'm going to speak about the project that I've been fortunate enough to do and what's brought me here today. So back in the fall, I remember Cierra reached out to me talking about, of course, this wonderful project that that she started curating along with Jen and Arielle. And they mentioned possibly putting together a zine that would feature the text, the Combahee River Collective Statement, originally published in 1977. When I read this email, I was immediately jazzed. I was super excited. I remember very vividly reading this text for the first time, my freshman year in my dorm, like my mind being blown that there were like these radical, badass Black people who were writing about things that I felt like internally I had always aligned with, but I just had never really seen it happen. Or I just felt like there wasn't really the space to speak this way, to think this way. So very excited. And I hadn't read the piece in a few years. So having the time to actually be able to reread everything was actually somewhat emotional, but such a great experience. So with all that said, this is a little fold-out zine. It's been produced on 45 GSM salmon-colored newsprint. And yeah, it's pretty much outlining a text that I feel like should be required reading for everyone. And that's a whole other conversation we can get into. And yeah, I feel very, very blessed and fortunate to have been able to have the privilege to create a piece like this, especially right now, sitting in the space that I'm currently in. Like I said, I'm a grad student, which is a privilege in itself, and I'm so grateful to be here. But it's scary to think that knowledges and histories and writings like this can sometimes feel siloed or left simply in the institutional space. I know personally, like I've mentioned already a few times, I didn't start reading a lot of these writers and these incredible thinkers until I was in the privileged space of higher education. So while I'm grateful to know these voices, I am uncomfortable with the idea that it can only be limited to some. When it's already such a limited space as it is, it's already such a limited history, or a history that has been limited, and excluded from so many spaces. So with that, I'm hoping that in the future, like continuing Black radicalism and continuing this space of archive and history, to make sure that there are access points to extend this knowledge outside of the spaces, the institutional spaces that they seem to be limited to. The archive is a beautiful thing. It's powerful. It's the space that allows us to connect with what once was. But if the archive is being curated by a certain sect, certain voices, and with only specific interests in mind, erasure just continues to happen. And it's this perennial, insidious thing. So I feel like it's our responsibility as Black creatives who want to share these stories, who want to share our stories, to make sure that it is accessible to whomever's interested and to people who might not even know they're interested because they don't know it exists. Yes, and going to the next slide. And that's pretty much all I got. Please, like, I love connecting with whomever, so please feel free to hit me up, DM me on Instagram, email me, and, we can talk more just about the archive. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you so much, Zoe. That was very amazing, very informative, and your works are so beautiful. Thank you. So, hello, my name is Mithsuca. I'm a self-identified multidisciplinary storyteller, but could also be viewed as an artist, writer, educator. And so I'm really excited to go through some of my works with you. So I was raised in the city of Revere, Massachusetts. That's like kind of outside of Boston, still kind of Boston, doesn't want to be claimed by Boston, but you know the drill with like the outskirts of the city thing. So a lot of my experience as a creator has been majorly influenced by the internet. That's what I grew up with. In my community, I wasn't necessarily someone who's very visible. I was kind of somebody who fell back in shadows, especially in regards to like the identities that kind of intersect in my body. It was hard for me to truly feel like reflected in the spaces around me. So being a person raised on the internet, that was a way that I could curate my coming of age in a way. In my everyday life as a teenager, I spent a lot of that desperately wanting to find a safe space, particularly for my mind and body to exist at the same time. And the closest thing that I had to this was creating art, finding artists to feel inspired by that aligned with my identities. And I wouldn't say that for me, conventional education spaces were the most nurturing in that. I never felt really compelled to embrace my fullest self in high school. So in that experience, a lot of my individuality came from outsourcing, came from kind of like deeply researching my existence, which is strange. Did you think that you could experience your existence as you're processing it, as you're experiencing it? And so it's hard as a Black person because it feels like when we're growing up, our minds are developing as we're trying to like understand what weight our Blackness carries at the same time. And that can be very disorienting, especially with the added narrative of like womanhood being intertwined into all of that. And so imagine a childhood, but like a childhood where you're not fully present in your body. That's usually what we have to deal with. And so in that, creativity was my only form of visibility. Not necessarily visibility to other people, but is visibility to myself, an opportunity to recognize myself fully and truly. Most of the time as Black children, like we're forced to like grow up really fast to keep up with the constant dialogues that are happening about our bodies outside of us. Most children shouldn't have to worry about their skin tone or their lineage and how that contributes to how people even perceive them as a child, but that's an added burden that a lot of our children are growing up with. And so in that experience, like there's a lot of battling with a feeling of inadequacy, especially with all the attempts that I was making to assimilate and to conform, which felt very unnatural for my body, very unnatural for queer identity, Black identity, at the same time, trying to conform to an idea that isn't mine to conform to. And so me nurturing my creative soul felt like an act of rebellion. I felt rebellious to search for opportunities that would awaken me, that would challenge me, that would inspire me. And with conventional education spaces, I only was ever taught about myself through the lens of pity that whiteness has for people like me. And so I pursued activism, museum education as both a student and being in pursuit of being an educator. And the creative communities I would make that would also make it possible for me to find other people who were looking for that same relief. And that would start to nurture my practice into what it is right now. And because my experience as budding creative involved consistent exploration, all the tools that I found towards my healing were as a result of like many dark periods in my life, deep dark periods in my life. Our systems very much make it like, they very much fail us in the sense of we need to have proof to validate our need for healing. And most of the time, finding grounding or medicine to like break down all of those barriers and obstacles that we experience mentally, trying to engage with our environments, trying to engage with our society, is not, there's not much quality to it. It doesn't include as many conversations as it needs to. And so I was seeking love, understanding, community, and I found those things through creating more than I did my environment, which I feel like is what introduced me to the art of archival work, creating a record of like my internal process, a record of the death and rebirth that comes with being in a Black body, shedding the white gaze, shedding patriarchy. I was looking at my like Instagram because like I've had it since I was like really young, and it's basically become an archive of my transformation. And I think about how like if I hadn't made that record of myself, of my existence, of what it's taken me to become more myself in the world that we live in, the erasure that is created by our environments in terms of Black stories would have completely wiped out that that growth, that evidence of that growth. And it's also a great way to remind me of who I am, because there's always going to be kind of like this constant battle with your body and who you are in these spaces. So I see this to all shed light on where that interest started. Art to me was medicine. It reconnected me with a sense of curiosity I felt I wasn't allowed to tap into. As a child, again, Black children are often like stripped of that love for exploration and experimentation and pushed to grow up faster as a means of survival. And art wasn't something that I was asked to like survive in. It was just asking me to be. And all of the trauma that informed my coming of age is kind of where I start to notice like, these aren't just things that I'm dealing with, they're things that people around me are dealing with consistently. And I don't know, we make it so normal to mask our trauma as like inconvenience. And we pass that down, that mentality, to our younger generations, our like most impressionable and like precious minds. And I also see how it like haunts our older generation. So we're talking about generational trauma and how that carries in within a community. And so if it starts with our children and ends with our elders, like I really wanted to break down what we're doing wrong and what we collectively need to heal and how art can serve that. And that's when I started to see my work as a bridge between the viewer and their intuition, their ancestry, their bodies, the neglected child within them, acknowledging that, everyone not everyone who shares the similar experiences as me will have the strength to transmute that into what I have. And that in itself is a sad truth. And more often than not, we lose people to this loneliness. We lose healers, we lose leaders, we lose creators. And to allow that system to continue would be to fail our communities, even before, even like way before the community is created, right? Like before the next generation is born, we need to heal these things. And so my work is to contribute to my community by taking each person who views my work on this journey of introspection into radical self-acceptance and the personalized pursuit of success, and have that be spiritual and inclusive. And I often say that like I meet God through my work, because where else would I be so seen like purely? Like in my work, it frees me of my shame. It makes my body feel safe to exist in. It brings me joy that is like within reach. It holds space for the beauty and horror that comes with Black existence, and like no part is left unspoken. And if my work can provide that for me and provide that for others, to like inspire them to pursue their peace, I feel like I'm doing my job. My work is meant to be a mirror, and my work is like representation for the invisible. And so being an artist and creating this record has made me able to be both a student and a teacher. And in that exchange, I've been able to find more hope for what like Black life in the timeline that we're in has to offer. Because a lot of the time it kind of shows you what's working against you, and also makes me really grateful for experiences like this where I can have engagements with other artists that feel like, you know, we're in this together. And like, it can be a very isolating experience to be the one to want to break generational curses. And so my practice is always giving to me and always putting out to others. And I want to keep that balance. And I feel like that's what a lot of Black feminist work is just like nurturing communities and taking care of the people within them, and taking care of generations that haven't even been born yet. Like that's the weight that I feel like my work and all of our work carries. And so yeah, and these pictures are from my installation piece for the BCA. The quote in this piece is, "If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression." And I believe that wholeheartedly. And I feel like I've been tapping into this genre of work that now relates to public art, because I feel like taking our record of our existence a step further and putting it into the eyes of the public is like such a radical act, and it wouldn't need to be like a radical act if our representation was made a priority, if our narratives are made a priority. And so having the opportunity to place art in spaces where it's unavoidable to see us is something that I feel like will continue to heal our communities, especially during this timeline, especially with like COVID and stuff. We're trying to fight back that erasure while at a time where everybody's slowed down. And I know that by making ourselves visible, it's kind of like pushing this need for accountability, because otherwise we would be gaslit to believe that, you know, we don't need the things that we've been deprived of for our entire lives, which is safety, security, healing, love, visibility, respect. And so, yeah, I wanted to bring that play, that internal like visibility and understanding to public spaces, and know that that's going to transfer to the healing in the communities that that work is present in. But yeah, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for sharing your work with us. This was such an exciting presentation. I enjoyed seeing all of your work. For everyone that's watching us on YouTube, please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as best that we can in the time that we have left. I want to ask a question that actually wasn't on the sheet, which is to Zoe and Mithsuca. Both of your work is so playful. And you know, in the colors and the aesthetic. I'd just love to hear more about how you came to that. Like what drove you to your aesthetic?
For me, a lot of my work is inspired by, like, I don't know, like fantasy, fairy tale, dreamscapes, spaces that, you know, don't necessarily tap into the reality that we're in. Not that that reality doesn't exist, but it feels like, for me, it kind of like a rebellious act to pair Black bodies with such fun imagery, with such vibrant colors. And I feel like even like as a Caribbean person, like I'm Haitian, like color is everything for us. Like that flamboyance is like part of our character and part of our visibility. And so I've always wanted to honor that. And I feel like a lot of the time, like, I don't know, records of Black existence have always been associated with like pain, even visually. But I also, I don't know, even in those conversations of pain, I always want to make space for Black joy and space for play and space for, like, I don't know, that playfulness, that joy. And so I try to include as many colors as possible. And I want people to see it. And I want people to like feel the energy that colors bring and have like Blackness kind of included in the rainbow, which could mean a lot of things. And so, yeah, I always try to stay true to that. Sometimes I'm not as colorful when I'm really trying to get introspective and like angsty and somber, but that at the end of the day, it's for me and my peeps. So it's always playful at the end of the day.
Yeah, I feel like I'm about to echo a lot of what you just said, Mithsuca, honestly, but it's funny. I remember having a conversation with one of my friends, I guess a few years ago now, just talking about depictions or what the Black aesthetic is, right, in art. Like, what does it look like? And echoing what Mithsuca just said, there's just so many depictions of Black experience, even though they're powerful and there's space that needs to be held for them. But so much of the Black experience seems to be in this vacuum of just constant trauma. And I just feel it's imperative to show the other outlets of the Black experience of just being a human in general. Being Black does not mean that you are solely left to just constantly be trying to climb this endless thing, this mountain that like you feel like you can never reach the top of, right? There's so many beautiful little, overlooks along the way. So yeah, with that, I feel like it's a radical act to be a Black maker who wants to just be playful and show that side of themselves. I know that my personality, I'm a goofy, silly person, so I'm gonna let that come through. I'm not going to fall to possible tokenisms or ideas that other people viewing my work might think it should look or feel or what I should be saying. So yeah, to me, it's super important to make in that space. But we'll see, like I was saying in my presentation, things evolve, your practice changes. So maybe 5 years from now, I'll be like, I want to have this more serious way that I'm approaching things, but I doubt it, knowing myself.
That's hilarious. And Nakia, your writing is so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your piece with us. And I just want to, I guess, learn more about your thoughts on writing, writing as a tool for healing, and what kind of, I want to say, repair can happen when you write or when people write in general.
Thank you. Definitely, I mean, what repair can happen? I mean, writing happens in stages, and there are some, I mean, once my writing is printed, there's like no turning back from that. But from the journaling phase, it's always, it's a process, and it comes in waves, and it comes in stages. So as far as the repair for me, like publishing my first book of poetry, that's when I truly like tapped into old, and in my book I have pieces that are written by hand that I pulled from my journals from when I was a teenager, and that represents like my younger self. So like sometimes in my writing, if it's digital, you'll see it may be like italicized, it'll be a different font. And then like the more sophisticated and mature font, that represents my older self and that evolution. And in my writing, I would say that the repair comes from, number one, you just get, I look at it as a brain dump. You get everything you're feeling that you can't say to the outside world, you cannot share with the outside world. You put that on a page, on a napkin, just to get it out, right? Then I read it. And for me, that's my processing. And then maybe I'll return to it, read it again. And then I'll start to put the pieces together if I go into editing, just to make it make sense for me in regards to poetry. But I think the repair happens once you get it out. And then if you decide as the writer, if you want to process that and go through that development of what you just revealed about yourself, because my writing is always reflecting, it's my reaction to my feelings about what's going on in my life, what I view in the world, what I read in the newspaper, what someone, at work said to me. If, an Uber driver is dropping me off in front of my home and is asking me, am I going to the, homeless shelter or the building that I live in? Like that for me, I have to process those things sometimes. Instead of me like going ham, going off, I'll put it in my journal. So I think the repair begins once you pick up that writing utensil and you're brave enough to put your raws. And in my writing is, when people meet me, like they think whatever they think about my exterior and who I am. But when they meet Nakia on the page, like that's when I'm totally unstripped. And I'm my most honest is when I'm writing. And that's when the repair happens, when you let it out, when you decide to process that, if you decide to return back to it. And I never throw any journals away. I always tell people, I tell my students all the time, even when they're working on, their drafts. And I'm like, no, keep that. Don't erase it, because sometimes I return back to some of my earliest works. And even if it's like, a line or a word, I'll return back to it. So hopefully that answered your question.
100%. I'm thinking about the Notes app right now, and how I revisit my own notes through the Notes app, and what is the role of technology in our memory keeping? But I wanted to ask a question. So I'm thinking across your practices, like all of you discussed, like education, writing, print, figuration, visual art. I'm wondering how we can locate ourselves in the world today, like this political moment, this historical moment, this artistic moment, and like this desire for ahistoricism and this impulse to deny, and how practiced we are in the world at that denial, and how practiced we are in producing fictions, from like the everyday person to the people that make up institutions and archives and systems and organizations, schools up to the state. And I wanted to ask y'all, like, what do you think your role or the artist's role in general is in memory keeping and the production of truth? Like, I'm just thinking about that Lucille Clifton poem where she's like, they want me to remember their memories. And I keep on remembering mine. And I'm just wondering like how y'all feel about that.
I always go back to Nina Simone when she said, you know, an artist's like role is to reflect the times. And I look at that, although like journalism is a practice, it is not so much art, but I look at my role in the community as a journalist is to reflect the times, and also in my writing too. And I think about like when I visited the National African American Museum, and then it's just like people's, you know, they're just artifacts from their lives, their clothes, their writing, their combs, and all the things. I think about that a lot in my journals. So when I'm no longer here and someone wants to read that, they understand what was going on during that time, and how I was feeling, but also what was happening. So yeah, I think like my role as an artist and an educator is to reflect the times, and then things that are happening. Like I saw the interview with Meg Thee Stallion and who was it? Meg Thee Stallion and Maxine Waters. And I had to share that with my students because I'm like, that is my job to bring things in so we can talk about what's happening, what's going on with Asians in our community. It's important for me to spark a conversation as an educator to give my students space to talk, to acknowledge that this is happening and give them space to talk about their feelings about it. And like, if they decide what we're gonna do as a community, what are we gonna do together? So I think that's what my role has become.
Yeah, really well said. Yeah, I feel like going back to what you just said, Nakia, I think the key idea here is knowing that there's space to even tell said memories and stories. So, and also going back to your comment, Cierra, speaking about digital technologies and what those serve now as an archive, as like pieces of memory, right? I mean, the idea of the archive, I feel like the connotation of the word is left in this sort of like high space when really it's just being somebody who you can find personal value in your own stories and your own messages, whatever it may be, but knowing that you can tell these stories in whatever sort of medium is important. Really, at the end of the day, we're all kind of archivists today because we have a notes app, we have Instagram, we're all constantly archiving our lives. It's just knowing that your experience is valuable enough to be told, to be preserved, to influence future generations and people like who look like yourself. So yeah, just I think the knowing is the biggest piece, like finding the agency to know that your story, your narrative matters.
Yeah, I feel that, all of that. Yeah, and that in itself is like such a, like in all of these works, especially with like black feminist works, it's usually like Black people, Black women, like carrying the labor of like both healing themselves and their community at the same time. And that responsibility comes with a lot of exhaustion, a lot of emotional and mental deterioration during that. And you can sometimes see how that mimics itself in the health of the physical body and the level of safety that we feel moving through the world. And that like level of awareness can make it hard to remember anything else. Like it's been in times of like silence and in times of like moments with myself and conversations with my work that I'm able to remember things about myself, remember things about my past, my childhood. Like most of the time, like the way that our environments are created, it doesn't hold room for us to even have like the privilege or the luxury to remember ourselves. or remember our experiences, or remember our joys even. And so like, I feel like my work is just also like, I don't know, it's like there's like consistent, like, I don't know how to like wrap this up, like, you know, in like Men in Black, when they like like erase your memory with that little like flashlight thing. That's kind of what it feels like interacting with any institution here. Yeah. So like, or any like system that functions in the world that we live in right now. Like, and even the ways that like our only connection to our evidence, like representation, like bodies, is through the constant, like, Zoe, in your work, you're talking about like the constant display of our death, our anguish, our pain. That's really all that media sometimes tries to remind us is happening. And so having other creators who contribute to that archival work of even our joy and our like pursuits, our interests, our like hobbies, like just like our existence period, like I feel like has contributed immensely to our ability to remember, especially in the age of like technology. It's just like, how do we use that to the fullest extent to continue this like trend of us being like visible to everyone? And we've always been visible. Like, see how we be showing up in the culture when the culture is really our culture. So like, how could we forget? But also like, how can we remember? It's like so crazy. It's so complex, but I hope that answers your question.
So I have a question for actually both of you. I'm going to go into journalist mode right now. So for my first question is for Mithsuca. As someone, would you consider yourself a part of the Gen Z generation? I have to ask that and not assume, because my students, if they're watching, they'll get me, like, nah, get it together. But would you consider yourself a part of that generation?
I do, in the sense that like I don't know, my work is backed up by the internet. It's backed up by like an understanding of how the internet works. I feel like our influencers, our artists are getting younger and younger and younger, which is badass. But it's also like, because the internet has given us access to even the concept. So I feel like in that sense, like I haven't had to like, I don't know, millennials kind of are like existing like the transition of all of that, and like their practices have been informed by that. And I feel like my practice is informed in a very different way. Like, I've been doing stuff on the internet since I was like 60. And I've identified as an artist for that long too. And I think about how that has been different from my experience particularly. And so, yes, I would say so. But also I feel like I'm in this like gray area, because I don't know. I do kind of like feel like I needed to strip my practice down to like the roots, like the origins of like my elders, I guess. Just because I think like practicing in that format has been like healing for me too. And so it's very complex as everything. Yeah, but I do identify as Gen Z, which is really funny.
Now, I just wanted to ask you that, because I'm curious to know. I'm always thinking about, and my students are so, in the Gen Z generation, I feel like they're so clear about who they are, who they are not, right? And as someone who, you know, is a millennial, right? They're very transparent about like, don't come in and tell us who we are. So what advice would you give to educators when they're working with that generation and understanding, learning to try to understand who they are, and how do we make authentic connections and give them space to be who they are without, we do, have experience in the wisdom, because we've been y'all's age, y'all haven't been ours, but things are changing. So what advice would you give adults and educators on how to reach the younger generations?
I think that contributes to the conversation of rapidly needing to age at a time where you're supposed to be like taking every building block of your character one step at a time. And I think that like having like a intention that is set in that intention that is set in building those building blocks with them towards introspection, I feel like is really important, because we could be like, don't come and tell me who I'm not, but who is with you, who is sitting with you at home to help you understand who you are. And I think that, we have a lot of access to the internet that kind of gives us inspo to that, but I think that like core intimate exchange where it's like truly like we're getting down to like what your needs are in this education space, in this experience of learning. How do we continue to nurture learning being fun for you, being adventurous for you? How do we get you to consistently want to take a step outside of your comfort zone and break down that vulnerability and get down to like the core and foundation of who you are? Like, there's like that joke of like Gen Z can organize a whole protest but can't set up a doctor's appointment over the phone, that kind of thing. Like, I think being the like kind of like taking the role of like an ancestor, like a spirit guide, like is like what educators can do and what educators really are. Like, we're teaching like what we've learned, and like I would say also handle your students like you would want to be handled when you were a student, because that usually is what informs how I treat my students. Is like, I remember how crappy high school it was, and now y'all are doing it over Zoom through computer screens with your parents like breathing down your neck, like in the confines of your pajamas, like yes, but also like that can be very isolating, and not many students are willing to like share how painful that experience can be right now. So we gotta be very gentle with them, even though they want to be like guns a-blazing, like ready for any riot, any rally, anything. But you need that care. You need to remind them that self-care is part of that process too. Which kind of also leads me to a question which you can respond, but I also wanted to know like how you both are taking care of yourselves while you're making the work that you are right now. Are you like making sure that you're mentally and physically able to continue doing this work? Because a lot of the times, like the institutions that support us aren't really looking for that, like aren't really making space for that first before they ask for our work. So, yeah.
Yeah, two things. I wanted to, one, respond to something you just said, Mithsuca, about educators teaching in a style that they will want to be taught in. I feel like that like is such a tiny but powerful thing to say, because I feel like so much of my grade school education, I had instructors that I can vividly remember made these microaggression type comments, these things that belittled my perception of my intellectual capability that I am still, reckoning with today. So being a shepherd, being someone who has those sort of experiences and remembering to not pass down that sort of trauma to the next sect of people who need to learn, I feel is so imperative and so important, and like such a great way to approach education in general, especially as a person of color. And then getting to your question about self-care. I don't know. It's been challenging, of course, with the panorama and just like all of the other things that are going on at the same moment, I feel like I have been trying to challenge myself to find more space to really like recharge, reconnect, connect with my loved ones, reach out, all that good stuff. But it's challenging. This is definitely a very, very challenging time, as we all know. Personally, I feel like the most positive thing that I try to make a point to do every single day for myself is to go for a walk. It sounds super simple, but it's literally what I look forward to, because it's the period where I get to clear my head. I get to be outside. I get to be reflective in a way that doesn't feel like isolating, because, you know, I'm still kind of out and about and seeing whomever. So yeah, I feel like if you are someone right now who is having a hard time trying to hone in on this self-care piece that I feel like is being shoved down our throats almost, try and find that one thing that you feel like you could actually just look forward to doing every single day. And that one thing alone, I think, can like serve in a multitude of ways. It can be very powerful.
And self-care for me looks like, because I'm a big self-care person. It looks like cooking. I love to cook. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm always chefing something up. That really helps me ground different parts of my week. Meditation, Trill Fit Studio, they have free meditation every Sunday at 4 p.m. and it's 30 minutes. And there is a teacher, and her name is Megan, and she guides you through that. And I sit right here in this chair every Sunday at 4 o'clock to meditate. And I am embracing this time that we're in, where we're being forced to slow down. I have the privilege that I can work from home, and I don't know what's going to happen on the other side of this. But as we know, what we all consider normal, we know that wasn't normal at all, and it wasn't sustainable. And I was tired, and I'm sure all of us were. So in this moment where we don't have to like rip and run and go places, my self-care is just for me to be present, to acknowledge the thoughts and like the ways that wasn't sustainable, always trying to be on the grind and go, acknowledge when I have those thoughts and just be able to relax, even if it's just sitting in silence. And sitting in silence is free. It doesn't cost anything. So yeah, just embracing the time, that the period that we're in, and just that slowness. And the word I said, you know, this is my year of ease. Ease is a word that I've just been embracing. This is my year of ease. So that's how I practice and maintain my self-care.
Mithsuca, do you want to answer? Did you answer?
I didn't. I mean, yes to all of that. Like, I didn't remember that I had a body until quarantine. Like, I didn't remember that my body had needs like until quarantine. I was moving at a very rapid pace, and so now I'm very grateful for silence. I'm very grateful to hear myself think. I'm very grateful to be able to pay full attention to the people around me and my loved ones and my passions, hobbies, interests, everything. Like, it's definitely a time where I can like curate and collect inspiration again too, to like restructure and reset my entire practice, not even just like my artistic practice, but the practice in the ways that I take care of myself. The practice in the ways where I learn about like how to assess my needs and function in my body during this time, because I know that for the next era of my life, my career, my interests, my artistic practice, I'm going to continue to need to have those conversations and continue to need to sit in silence for long enough for me to know what the next set of needs are going to be for me to continue doing this work. And I think that this time really emphasized that. And so that information has been like one of the things that I'm extremely grateful for. And I hope that we can take what we learned in this period of quiet to really like make sure that when we get moving again, it's not like a nightmare, not a shit show like it was before. It might be a little bit, I can't guarantee anything. Not gonna get my hopes up, but at least like, you know, our labor will be met with also like us being able to take care of ourselves too in this new cycle. It's like, we're not gonna compromise or sacrifice our well-being and our practices. They should be able to live equally, and institutions should also acknowledge that as something that they need to nurture when they start to reap the benefits of our work. Not that they specifically should, but like when they start to want to have these conversations and narratives around like, how can we break down white supremacy in our spaces, make sure that the Black creators that you work with can eat, have like a roof over their head, can afford their practices. Let's get to it, because we should be able to feel like safe while doing this too.
Safe and whole, period. Thank you all so much for sharing your words and your practices with us. Zoe, Mithsuca, Nakia, thank you so much for contributing to the ecosystem that brought about this project. We are so excited to, wrap up our first conversation in this series. So thank you again. Thank you for everybody who joined us online. We're super excited to see you on March 20th. March 20th will be the second in our series. So thank you for joining us. We hope that you come for the next one.
And I'm just going to pop in with a few words from Boston Center for the Arts. And thank you so much. I'm Randy Hopkins. I run the Visual Arts program at BCA. And this has been so inspiring and so joyful. I'm smiling, I'm moved, and I know just really appreciate what you've put into this discussion. So I want to thank the artists, Asuka Barry, Zoe Pulley, and Nakia Hill for the conversation. Cierra, thank you so much for hosting and bringing out so many interesting aspects of this conversation. And also to Cierra, as well as Arielle Gray and Jen Mergel for co-organizing what has been an amazing year-long project for us, Combahee's Radical Call. And I hope you'll stay with us for the next program in the series as well. Right now, like live at the Boston Center for the Arts in front of the Mills Gallery, you can grab Zoe's incredible zine for free, sitting out. It's just such a beautiful object. I hope people walking by will do that, and take a look at Mithsuca's mural in our windows. That's still up until April, and it's so joyous to walk by and see that. So thank you guys. Also, and I have to thank Demita Frazier, who has inspired this and put her spirit into it. And I also want to thank my BCA colleagues, especially Andrew Gromanis, who's behind the scenes making this all work. Boston Art Review for being an incredible co-presenter with us, and also our generous sponsors, including NEFA for their new Public Art for Spatial Justice Program, which was a key element in making this possible. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, our participants. We've had such a lively group of people watching today. I do hope you'll all come back and join us on March 20th for the next conversation, the next in the series, which is going to be going on for the next couple of months. So please tell your friends, and we look forward to seeing you back on March 20th. Have a great Saturday, people.